And now this morning, we are so blessed to have returned to us Danny Martin. Danny.
Well, thank you, Ed. It's a gift to be back at the Grange, a place of happy memories. I hold John in my heart as I share this morning. I'm hoping you'll hear echoes of the readings in my reflection, but from an Irish perspective, because this, after all, is the week of St. Patrick. So I'm calling my reflection on this late tarry Sunday, Saving Our Civilization, an Irish model. Wow. Probably sounds a little grandiose, I know, but let me explain. The essence of the religious process, I believe, what we call spirituality, is translation, a discovery of meaning that transforms and informs how we live. The Irish Celts were naturally spiritual in this way, passionate about learning and the discovery of meaning, but in a way that was rooted in the earth and therefore informed their lives. Celtic Christians acknowledged two sources of meaning or revelation: sacred scripture and nature. And they reflected this in the interwoven knots and spirals of their art, music, and practices. For them, spirituality was awakening to God, calling to God in and through the world, and allowing this awareness to shape their lives and their contribution to this divine conversation. I'm reminded of how Thomas Merton describes contemplation. He wrote, "It is as if in creating us, God asked a question. And in awakening us to contemplation, he answered the question, so that the contemplative is at the same time question and answer." Celtic spirituality meant entrusting oneself to the mystery of life living itself, in and as us, along with everything in the world. Celtic Christians witnessed to this with their symbolic martyrdoms. Martyr, by the way, is a Greek word that literally means witness. These Celts had three kinds of such witness. One they called green martyrdom, that referred to communion with the earth, like St. Kevin's life in Glendalough, that witnessed to the experience of God in the rhythms of nature that informed human living. The poet Patrick Kavanagh captures this sense of God and nature when he describes the mundane, even coarse lives of farmers eking out a living in the stony grey soil of County Monaghan. He writes, "Yet sometimes when the sun comes through a gap, these men know God the Father in a tree. The Holy Spirit is the rising sap, and Christ will be the green leaves that will come at Easter from the sealed and guarded tomb." Many years ago in Africa, my friend Benny and I used these lines as our Easter mantra. The second way of witnessing to the mystery of life living itself was white martyrdom, which was a form of continuous pilgrimage or search, a constant pushing to the edge of things. There is the story of a famous pilgrim, St. Brendan the Navigator, who practiced this kind of martyrdom in a special way by going to sea in a rudderless boat. Once on such a pilgrimage, he and his monks were on the lookout for land in order to celebrate the Easter mysteries. When they had all but given up hope, an island suddenly appeared. So they went ashore and celebrated their rituals. But when they had finished and understandably decided to spend the night and begun to build their fire and prepare supper, the land started to move, forcing them to rush back to their boat just in time to see the island disappear beneath the waves. It had in fact been a whale that had offered its body to the monks, but only when they had gone to the edge. Seamus Heaney picked up on the story in a poem called The Disappearing Island. Once we presumed to found ourselves for good between its blue hills and those sandless shores where we spent our desperate night in prayer and vigil. Once we had gathered driftwood, made a hearth, and hung our cauldron like a firmament. The island broke beneath us like a wave. The land sustaining us seemed to hold firm only when we embraced it in extremis. All I believe that happened there was vision. The Celtic Christians believed that when we go to the edge in extremis, then new life emerges to work with us. As Wendell Berry, the poet, puts it, it may be that when we no longer know what to do, we have come to our real work. Red martyrdom was less common, at least in the literal sense of spilling blood, but nonetheless a real experience that sometimes happened as a result of the other martyrdoms, which challenged the old ways things were done, and the people who represented this old way. Thus, the Celtic Christians encountered the reprimands of church authority, which sometimes used seemingly unimportant things as an excuse to suppress their wild, searching spirit. The Synod of Whitby in 664 used the Celtic tonsure and the date of Easter as a way to bring these recalcitrant Celts to heel. But my focus in this reflection is to see if I can relate this clearly more colorful and creative Celtic spirituality to our present world with its painful problems that we are all too familiar with. Suffice to say that these problems are clearer and clearer signs of a collapsing civilization. To help us do that, I want to take a look at what Thomas Cahill described in a book of the same name as How the Irish Saved Civilization. First of all, let me say that Ireland did not come under the rule of Rome, neither the empire nor the church, at least for a time, the way the rest of Europe did, for a variety of reasons. Geography, stories of wild tribesmen, or maybe just the weather, who knows? The first formal missionary to Ireland was Patrick. I say first formal missionary because the Christian message likely reached Ireland much earlier through their wandering Druid scholars who would have brought back news of the new movement, the new Christian movement from the European mainland. Be that as it may, Patrick clearly had the sense to work with what he found when he arrived, or rather, he had been there before as a boy, kidnapped from Britain by Irish raiders and made to work as a slave. But even after he escaped, he felt called back by the Irish. He had already experienced the people's deep sense of the land with its holy wells and sacred sites, portals, they believed, to the center of the earth, the axis mundi, the source of power. He had seen also the teacher leadership structures of their Druid schools, their great love of learning, and their passion for going to the edge. Thus, under his direction, Celtic Christianity developed a unique form of monasteries that were not the traditional enclosures for monks, but centers for learning about how to live as a Christian that guided the people and drew pilgrims from all over Europe. This learning included both the preservation of traditional wisdom, sacred and secular, in the famous illuminated manuscripts, like the Book of Kells you're probably familiar with, but also the cultivation of a passion for going to the edge and into the unknown. These places of learning spread throughout the country, fusing Christianity with their older traditions and developing a culture that became an island of saints and scholars, a beacon for dark times. So they were in a unique position to respond to the paradigm shift that was happening in Europe as the Roman Empire imploded and violence poured into the cultural vacuum, like an enormous January 6th storming of the Capitol, destroying everything in its path, including the books and treasures, the archives of the passing age, and plunging Europe into the Dark Ages. One wonderful example of how they responded was a group of 13 monks led by Columbanus and his closest disciple, Gallus, who sailed to continental Europe in the early 7th century. First, there were 2 decades in the northern territories of France, then south down the Moselle River, along the Vosges Mountains, across the Rhine, glimpsing the Alps, and finally descending to Lake Zurich. There they find a mishmash of tribes, German and Romansh dialects, ancient practices, a land up for grabs after Rome's downfall. Charismatic Columbanus woos the locals. He and his followers teach, travel, found monasteries. A jealous ruler expels them, the vicious queen Brunhilda. So Columbanus continues south across the Alps to Lucca, Firenze, and Rome, finally Bobbio, which became the most important monastic settlement in early Europe. They found a library, saved copies of Cicero and Virgil from oblivion, and write of Europe as a common cultural entity, the first on record to do so. Gallus stays behind and reaches the shores of Lake Constance in what is now northeast Switzerland. He gathers followers, prays, writes, teaches, and grows a monastery. Europe sinks further as the power vacuum left by Rome sucks in barbaric tribes and jealous princedoms. But the foundations for a new culture are laid. 2 centuries later, the Abbey is the chief center of learning and teaching in all of Germanic Europe, named after its founder, attracting illustrious scholars from across the continent and droves of pilgrims, the world's first tourists, who helped pay for the upkeep. The new town of St. Gallen grows around the monastery. Manuscripts, gospels, the story of Gallus himself are written in the library by Irish hands. Precious records of a time when learning was scarce and preserved learning even scarcer. In 1291, Switzerland is born. The legend of Gallus rolls on. St. Gallen remains one of the most important centers of Christianity on the continent. The Dark Ages come towards a close. The Renaissance arrives, is built upon the classic Christian ideas the Irish monks sought to spread in the first place. In 1798, France stages a revolution. Religion falls out of favor. The monastery is shut down, the monks chased out, the abbey secularized, but survives. Later, a boys' school is opened. Modern tourists come in waves from east and west. In 1983, UNESCO recognizes the indisputable impact of Gallus on the course of European culture. In 2018, the Abbey offers an international exhibition of manuscripts to show the contribution of Irish learning to Christian Europe in the Middle Ages. Today, we need a similar movement to save our civilization. We need to learn, or perhaps relearn, how to live in the world. We need to lay the foundations for a new America, a new world, in fact, that will emerge from the ashes of our present collapsing institutions and structures. Today, we need the spirit that inspired that small band of brothers to inspire us to be the founding fathers and mothers who will give birth to a new kind of human society. We can be the missionaries of this new world by coming together to connect around the ever-expanding self-evident truths about reality as one and many. One being that is a communion of subjects unfolding into increasingly complex and beautiful forms. Perhaps the internet will be our tool of evangelization, our vehicle for the good news that life is one, but also interconnected, and therefore eternal, meaningful, and hopeful. That we can rise again out of the ashes of a crumbling society, the way a new Europe rose out of the ashes of the Dark Ages. Let me point to an effort that reflects the spirit of those wandering Irish missionaries. It is called A New American We. Founded on a method we call mindfulness dialogue that marries deep experience of reality with the exploration of traditional wisdom in order to generate new understanding, new meaning, that preserves traditional wisdom, but expands it to respond to the unknown. A method that can be applied to the reimagining of all the aspects of our lives, from religion to commerce and from education to politics. You can take a look at the website, anewamericanwe.com, and see how you can join in a new green and white martyrdom witness. This new American We offers a framework for the process and calls on our President Biden to use it to launch a national conversation that will heal our collective soul by enabling us to work with our differences in a way that generates new shared understanding. From the hoped for many who will commit to this vision, perhaps a special task force, a kind of heart corps will emerge, like the Irish heart corps of Columbanus and his monks, who will give themselves to deepening our new relationship with the world and strategizing how to promote it as the foundation for a new culture. Maybe you can be part of that heart core. Of course, I realize that this is completely unrealistic and simply impossible. But I'm sure those monks felt the same about their vision. So just as they entrusted themselves to the power of life living itself through them, perhaps we can entrust ourselves to the God of life that wants to live itself in ever-expanding ways through us. I noted earlier that the essence of the Celtic way was entrusting oneself to life by deliberately letting go of our illusions of control in order to participate in life's unfolding. A piece by an American poet called Rosemary Traumer captures this process of the continuous entrusting that we need if we are to stay the course. She says, "Make me fall in love with letting go, and give me a heart that breaks again and again, the way ocean waves break, unpredictable and endless breaking and endless release, in which nothing is ever really lost." It's a wonderful metaphor. Waves breaking in an endless release in which nothing is lost. Also a strategy for saving civilization that calls us back to our true purpose, to be question and answer, as Merton described it, to hold the tension between the wisdom of tradition and the impulse to unfold into the unknown, and to be thereby communities of discovery for a new world, like the Grange is. Our present situation is clearly a frightening crisis, but it is also therefore a powerful opportunity to take the radical steps that the Christian message is always about, to respond to the challenge. So take a look at the New American We website and see how you can join in this new Celtic-inspired green and white martyrdom that will save our civilization. Banachti Niev Naheran Ave Oringulyer. May the blessings of the saints of Ireland be with us all. Blessings on you all.